I had been uneasy for months. Carrie, my wife of 22 years, had been acting differently, nothing too obvious, but enough to set off alarms in my gut. She'd started coming home later, her phone always within arm's reach, and her texts filled with an unusual number of smiley faces sent to Michelle, her best friend. But it was the quiet shift in our intimacy that really got to me. We were always close, never had major issues, but lately, something was off. I didn't want to be that paranoid husband, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. On this particular Saturday, my schedule had shifted unexpectedly, and I found myself coming home earlier than usual. I thought nothing of it, just another ordinary day. But when I walked through the front door, the house was eerily silent. No kids. Just Carrie and Michelle, who were supposedly catching up after months of missing their usual girl time. I headed upstairs, my footsteps quieter than I intended, and what I saw when I opened our bedroom door was like a bullet to the chest. Carrie, my wife, the mother of my children, tangled up in sheets with Michelle, both of them, naked, entwined like lovers. In that moment, my heart stopped. Time slowed as I stood there, rooted to the floor. Carrie, the woman I'd spent over 2 decades with, the mother of my children, was there naked, wrapped around Michelle like I had never seen before. It was surreal, like watching someone else's nightmare unfold. The two of them jolted when they saw me, scrambling to untangle themselves. Carrie's face went pale, her wide eyes filled with terror, like a deer caught in headlights. Michelle clutched the bedsheet to her chest, her mouth slightly open but unable to form words. For a moment, nobody spoke. There was nothing to say that could make this scene any less catastrophic. I wanted to scream, to rage, to demand an explanation, but all I could manage was a hoarse whisper. "What the hell is this?" My voice cracked, barely audible, but thick with fury and disbelief. Carrie opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She sat there, trembling, glancing between Michelle and me as if she were looking for an escape, a way to rewind time. I could see it in her eyes. She hadn't planned on me walking through that door today. But life doesn't always follow the script. I had to know how long this had been going on, how long I'd been living a lie. "How long, Carrie?" I croaked, each word feeling like it was tearing my throat apart. Carrie finally found her voice, though it was small and fragile. "Jim, it's not what you think." "Not what I think." I snapped, suddenly finding the energy to step forward. "I'm looking right at it." Her words felt like a slap in the face. The woman I thought I knew, the one I trusted with everything, was trying to tell me that what I was seeing her wrapped up in our bed with her best friend wasn't what it seemed. But there was no denying it, no rationalizing it. The truth was in front of me, plain as day, and I couldn't unsee it. Michelle finally spoke, her voice shaking. "Jim, we didn't mean for this to happen. It's complicated." Complicated. That was the word they always used on those talk shows when someone tried to explain why they had betrayed someone who loved them. "It's complicated." No, it wasn't complicated. It was simple. They had lied. They had cheated. They had destroyed my world without a second thought. I could feel my heart racing, the heat rising in my face. My fists clenched, not knowing whether to punch the wall or break down in tears. "How long?" I asked again, more forcefully this time, locking eyes with Carrie. She owed me that much. She owed me the truth, no matter how much it hurt. She hesitated, tears pooling in her eyes. "A few months," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A few months. Months of this. Behind my back." Every time she had told me she was going out with Michelle, they weren't just grabbing coffee or catching up on girl talk. No, they were God. I couldn't even think it. "And you were just going to keep this from me?" I asked, incredulous. "Pretend nothing was wrong?" Carrie broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jim. I swear I didn't. I didn't know how to stop." I didn't know how to stop, as if she had been caught in some kind of current, powerless to swim back. But she had made a choice, multiple choices, to betray me, to lie to me every time she looked me in the eye. The weight of that realization crushed me. There was no undoing this. No apology or tearful explanation would ever erase the sight of my wife in bed with her lover. And worst of all, it wasn't even a man. It was Michelle. I staggered back, struggling to catch my breath as if someone had punched me in the gut. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to tear the room apart, but I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, weighed down by the realization that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. It wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was the fact that it was with her, Michelle, her closest friend, another woman. I had always joked about how inseparable they were, how Carrie seemed to light up whenever Michelle was around. But I never imagined, never thought this could be behind it. How stupid I had been. All those nights Carrie came home late from catching up with Michelle, those long conversations I wasn't part of, The way she seemed distant, like she was living in another world. And now I knew why. Carrie was still sobbing, her face buried in her hands. Michelle, silent beside her, looked away, avoiding my eyes. She didn't try to defend herself again, didn't say a word. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. Or maybe she just didn't care. I couldn't tell, and at that moment, I didn't care either. "What do you expect me to do now?" I asked, my voice cold and unfamiliar even to myself. "How the hell do I deal with this?" Carrie looked up at me, her face wet with tears. "Jim, please, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." "Too late for that, don't you think?" My voice rose despite my attempt to stay calm. "So you made your choice. And for what? For her?" I shot a glance at Michelle, my words dripping with venom. "What the hell was I to you, Carrie? Just the guy who pays the bills? The father of your kids, but not enough to stop you from crawling into bed with someone else?" Carrie shook her head, choking on her sobs. "It wasn't like that. I love you. I still do." Bullshit. The word exploded out of me before I could stop it. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to me for months. You wouldn't." I stopped myself, my throat tightening with the anger and pain I had been trying so hard to control. There it was, the brutal, crushing truth that I had been avoiding since the moment I walked in on them. It wasn't just about the sex or the betrayal. It was about trust, about the life we had built together, and how she had taken that and shattered it without even giving me a chance to save it. Michelle finally spoke, her voice low, like she was addressing a room full of strangers, instead of the man whose life they had just destroyed. "Jim, I know it's hard to understand, but this wasn't about you. It was about us. Something we couldn't control." "Couldn't control?" I echoed, incredulous. "You didn't try to control it. You didn't even try to stop it." My gaze shifted to Carrie, cutting into her like a knife. "You've been lying to me for months, sleeping with her, and now you want me to believe it just happened." Carrie didn't answer. Her eyes were red, swollen, desperate, but she didn't say a word. She couldn't. The damage was done. I looked away from her, disgusted and heartbroken, all at once. I'd always thought I'd know what to do if Carrie ever cheated on me, if I ever found myself in this position. I'd leave. Walk away, no questions asked. But standing there, staring at the wreckage of my life, I realized how much harder it was to leave when everything you'd built was on the line. "How do we come back from this?" I asked, more to myself than to them. Neither of them answered. The silence in the room was deafening. Carrie finally stood, wrapping the sheet around her as if that could somehow shield her from the truth, from what she had done. "Jim, please. Let's talk about this. We can fix it. I don't want to lose you." I stared at her, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. The woman I had known for 22 years, the woman I thought I knew, was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I stood there, Carrie's pleas echoing in the back of my mind, but I felt detached, like I was floating above the scene. She said we could fix it, but what was left to fix? The image of them in bed together was burned into my brain, searing like a brand that would never fade. I couldn't see her the same way. I couldn't feel the same way. She stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached out toward me, the sheet slipping a little as she moved. "Jim, I swear it was never about hurting you. She stumbled over her words, trying to find some excuse that would make sense of the chaos she had unleashed. But I didn't care about her reasoning anymore. She could explain until she was blue in the face, but the damage was done. I backed away from her touch. "Don't," I said, my voice low, the edge of anger slicing through the air. "Just don't." She stopped in her tracks, her face crumbling, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost, but that empathy was quickly drowned by the tidal wave of betrayal crashing through me. Michelle stayed silent, her eyes flicking from me to Carrie, as though she were waiting for the right moment to vanish from this nightmare. I could see it written all over her face. She didn't want to be here anymore. This wasn't her marriage on the line. She could go back to her husband, Roger, explain it all away. Hell, maybe Roger was in on it. After all, they had an open relationship, right? Some twisted arrangement that made them think this was all okay. The thought of Roger's smug face made my blood boil. Was he sitting somewhere, laughing at how clueless I'd been this whole time? Did he know? Was he enjoying this? My fists clenched involuntarily. "Does Roger know?" I spat, glaring at Michelle. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Carrie, as if seeking permission to speak. "Or me?" Michelle flinched, but then her face hardened. "Yes," she admitted softly. "He knows. He doesn't mind." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and cold. "Of course he doesn't. Why would he? This must be some fun little game for you too. Carrie's eyes widened. Jim, don't let this isn't what you think. Roger's complicated, but complicated. I cut her off, my voice rising again. Is that supposed to make me feel better? That this wasn't just you and her sneaking around behind my back, but it was a whole damn show with her husband in the audience. How sick is that, Carrie? Carrie recoiled, her tears flowing freely now, but I couldn't stop. The anger was coming in waves, crashing over me, suffocating me. Doll, do you even know what you've done? To me? To us? To our family? What happens now, huh? What do I tell the kids when they ask why everything's falling apart? At the mention of the kids, Carrie crumbled, her legs giving out as she sank to the floor. She was sobbing uncontrollably now, her hands shaking as she tried to hold herself together. Jim, I love you. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you. But I couldn't hear her anymore. It was just noise now. Background noise to the storm raging in my head. I looked around the room. The rebel built for kids shared secrets, where we raised our kids shared secrets, shared sacred. The sheets were still rumpled from where Carrie and Michelle had been moments before. A sickening feeling twisted in my gut. And suddenly I couldn't be in that room anymore. Without another word, I turned on my heel and stormed out. Carrie's sobs followed me down the hallway, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. My mind was already spiraling, thoughts crashing into each other, a whirlwind of anger, pain, and disbelief. Down the stairs, out the front door. The cool air hit me like a slap, but it did nothing to quell the storm inside. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to break free. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. But all I could think about was the destruction Carrie had left in her wake. The life we had built together, crumbling into pieces I didn't know how to pick up. I didn't know where I was going, but my feet kept moving. The cool air felt sharp against my skin, cutting through the haze of emotions clouding my mind. My hands were still shaking, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't calm down. Every breath felt shallow, as if I was on the verge of losing control, teetering on the edge of something dark and violent. I ended up at the park near our house, the one where Carrie and I used to take the kids when they were younger. It was empty now, the swing swaying lightly in the breeze, the sound of the chains creaking eerily in the stillness of the night. I sat down heavily on one of the benches, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How could she do this to me? After 22 years of marriage, 3 kids, and a lifetime of memories, how could she throw it all away for Michelle? I knew our marriage hadn't been perfect lately, but I never thought it was this. Never thought she would betray me, especially like this. The image of them together flashed in my mind again, Carrie wrapped up in Michelle like I never even existed. The rage bubbled up, red hot and burning, and before I knew it, I slammed my fist into the bench next to me. The pain shot up my arm, but it was nothing compared to the pain in my chest. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just sit here and pretend that everything would be okay. It wasn't. It would never be okay again. And then like a switch flipping in my mind, my thoughts turned to Roger, Michelle's husband, that smug bastard. He had known the whole time. He hadn't just known he was okay with it. He was probably getting off on it, the sick bastard. A new wave of fury surged through me. And before I knew what I was doing, I was on my feet again, walking back toward my house. No, not my house. Michelle's house, the one just a few blocks over. The house where Carrie had probably spent hours with Michelle, laughing, touching, while I was clueless at home. So my vision tunneled as I walked, my footsteps heavy, driven by a singular focus, Roger. I had to face him. I had to see him. The man who thought this was some kind of game. The man who thought it was fine to watch his wife destroy someone else's family. Before I knew it, I was standing in front of Michelle and Roger's house. The lights were on, the faint sound of music playing from somewhere inside. I could see the backyard, the pool glistening under the moonlight. This was where they hosted all those barbecues. All those casual get-togethers where Carrie would laugh with Michelle and Roger would slap me on the back, asking how things were. All the while, they had been hiding the secret. I clenched my fists, my knuckles white, and stormed toward the backyard. I didn't knock. I didn't care. The gate swung open with a loud creak, and as soon as I stepped through, I saw them. Roger, sitting by the pool with a drink in his hand, completely relaxed like nothing in the world was wrong. The sight of him set me over the edge. Roger. I shouted, my voice booming, startling him as he turned to look at me. His face went from casual amusement to confusion and then recognition. Jim, he started standing up. What the hell are you doing here? Before he could say another word, I was on him. My fist connected with his jaw, the impact reverberating through my arm as he staggered back, dropping his drink. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Years of frustration, anger, and betrayal exploded out of me all at once, and I hit him again. And again. "You think this is a joke?" I shouted, grabbing him by the collar and throwing him to the ground. "You think it's funny to watch my life fall apart?" Roger tried to shield himself, his eyes wide with panic. "Jim, calm down, man. This isn't..." But I didn't let him finish. The fury had completely taken over. I swung at him again, blind to everything but the need to hurt him, to make him feel a fraction of what I was feeling. He groaned in pain as I landed another blow to his ribs, doubling over. It was only when I felt hands pulling me back that I snapped out of it. Michelle was screaming, trying to get between us. Carrie was behind her, pleading with me to stop. I breathed heavily, my chest rising and falling as I looked down at him. For a moment, the satisfaction of seeing him hurt was enough to cool the rage in my veins. But then reality crashed back in, and I realized what I'd just done. And worse, I realized it hadn't made anything better. The silence that followed was deafening. Roger groaned, struggling to sit up, his hand clutching his side as blood dripped from his lip. Michelle was kneeling beside him, her face pale, eyes wide with shock. Carrie stood a few steps behind, her hands of steps behind her. The whole scene was surreal, like I was watching it from outside my own body. I took a step back, my fists still clenched, shaking from the adrenaline and rage that had consumed me. My knuckles throbbed, but the pain was distant, overshadowed by the storm still raging inside me. I looked down at Roger, who was wheezing, trying to catch his breath, and a sick satisfaction flickered in my chest. He deserved this. They all did. But that feeling didn't last long. "Jim, what the hell are you doing?" Carrie's voice finally broke through the fog. She stepped toward me, her face wet with tears, but there was something else in her eyes now, fear. Not just fear of what I had done, but fear of me. "You have to stop." "I should have stopped you," I snarled, turning on her, the anger flaring up again. "But you didn't give me a chance, did you? You and Michelle sneaking around behind my back. And Roger," I shot a glance at the man still writhing on the ground. "He just sat back and let it happen." Michelle looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Jim, please, we didn't mean for it to get this far. It wasn't about hurting you." "I don't give me that crap," I shouted, my voice echoing through the backyard. "You didn't mean to hurt me. You didn't think about me at all." Carrie took another step forward, trying to reach out, but I backed away, shaking my head. Don't touch me. You don't get to fix this with a hug, Carrie. You don't get to make this go away with your tears." Her hand dropped, her face crumpling as the weight of my words hit her. For a moment, the only sound was Roger's strained breathing and the distant hum of the pool filter. I took a deep breath, my chest heaving as I tried to calm myself. The rage was starting to ebb, replaced by something colder. Numbness. I wanted to feel more anger, but it was like the fight had drained the last of my emotions, leaving only emptiness in its wake. The sound of sirens pierced the quiet night air, and my head snapped up. Red and blue lights flashed just beyond the backyard fence. Someone had called the cops. I felt Michelle's gaze on me, and she spoke softly, her voice shaky. "Jim, you have to go. You can't be here when they..." "I'm not running," I said flatly, cutting her off. "I'm not hiding from what I did." Carrie stepped closer, desperation in her voice. "Jim, please, think about the kids. I think about what'll happen if you..." "The kids?" I snapped, my voice low but cold. "You should have thought about them before you started screwing around with her." I pointed at Michelle, my hand shaking with barely contained fury. "This mess? This is on you." Carrie flinched, her eyes wide and wet, but she didn't respond. She couldn't. There was nothing she could say that would make any of this right. The gate to the backyard creaked open, and 2 police officers stepped through, their flashlights cutting through the dim light. One of them spoke, his voice firm but calm. "Sir, step away." I turned to face them, holding up my hands, my body still tense, but the fight drained out of me. "I'm done," I muttered, more to myself than to them. "I'm done." The officer approached cautiously, his partner hanging back as if waiting for me to make a move. "We're going to need you to come with us," he said, his hand hovering near his belt. I saw the handcuffs glinting in the light. I didn't resist. What was the point? As they led me out of the yard, I caught one last glimpse of Carrie, standing there, her face pale, eyes hollow. This was the woman I had built my life with, the mother of my children. And now she looked like a stranger, broken, lost, and terrified. But as much as that hurt, I couldn't feel sorry for her. She had made her choices, just like I had made mine. And now we were both paying for it. The cuffs clicked around my wrists, cold and final. The gate swung shut behind me, and as I was led to the waiting police car, I realized that this was only the beginning of the consequences. The cold metal of the cuffs bit into my wrists as the officer guided me toward the waiting patrol car. I could hear Carrie's voice faintly behind me, pleading with the officers, probably telling them this was all a misunderstanding. But there was no misunderstanding left. The truth had crashed through the fragile walls we'd built around our life, and nothing could hide it now. I sat in the back of the squad car, staring out the window at Michelle's house, at the people I thought I knew, now reduced to strangers in the span of a few hours. Roger was being helped to his feet by the paramedics. His face was swollen and bloodied, his body hunched over in pain, but he managed to glance over at me. There was no anger in his eyes, just fear and disbelief. Michelle stood beside him, clutching his arm as if she could somehow hold everything together. And Carrie, she stood alone, watching as they closed the door behind me. The car started moving, the scene fading into the background as the flashing lights illuminated the dark streets. My head felt heavy, a dull ache pulsing in my temples, but my mind was racing. How did it come to this? How did a simple marriage, a life I thought was stable, turn into this nightmare? At the station, the officers led me inside, past the rows of desks, the hum of radios, the faint smell of stale coffee and sweat hanging in the air. The whole process felt mechanical, being booked, my fingerprints taken, my belongings emptied into a plastic tray. It was surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. They placed me in a holding cell, and the door clanged shut behind me, sealing me into a tiny room with nothing but my thoughts. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving me exhausted and hollow. My body ached from the fight, my knuckles bruised and swollen, but that pain was nothing compared to what was churning inside. I leaned against the cold wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor, my head in my hands. All the anger that had fueled me was gone, replaced by a deep, suffocating sadness. I had lost control, given in to my rage, and now everything was destroyed. The life Carrie and I had built together, the family we had raised, it was all falling apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't even know if I wanted to stop it. The cell was quiet, save for the occasional sound of footsteps echoing down the hall. My thoughts spiraled, each one darker than the last. What was going to happen now? What would the kids think when they found out? I imagined their faces: Tom, our oldest, who had just started college, Emily, in her last year of high school, and little Jacob, still in middle school. They wouldn't understand. Hell, I didn't even understand. How was I supposed to explain this to them? How was I supposed to look them in the eye and tell them that their mother had betrayed me, that I had nearly beaten a man to death in a fit of rage? My throat tightened, and for the first time since all of this began, I felt the tears welling up, but I forced them back. I couldn't break down. Not here, not like this. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes, I couldn't tell. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. Eventually, the sound of footsteps approached, and the cell door opened with a groan. A tired-looking officer stood there, motioning for me to follow. "You're being released," he said, his voice flat. "Released?" I muttered, confused. "Your wife's here. She's posted bail." Carrie. Of course, it was Carrie. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, the lies, she was still trying to fix this. But how? How could we ever go back to the way things were? The officer led me to the front desk where Carrie was waiting. She looked broken, her eyes red and swollen, her face pale. She didn't say anything at first, just handed over the paperwork to the officer. The silence between us was suffocating. There were no words for what had happened, no way to make sense of the destruction we had both caused. As we walked out of the station, the cool night air hit me again, but it didn't bring the relief I hoped for. I still felt trapped, like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. Carrie finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Jim, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that. I never wanted to hurt you." I stopped walking and turned to face her. The streetlight cast a dim glow over her face, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with, buried beneath the wreckage of everything we had lost. She was broken, just like me. "I don't know if we can fix this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded as if she had already known the answer. "I know. I don't want to lose you." I looked away, the weight of her words sinking in. Part of me still loved her. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, the lies, I couldn't just turn off 2 decades of love and memories. But the hurt was still raw, and I didn't know if it would ever heal. "We need time," I said finally. "I need time." She nodded again, wiping away the tears that had started to fall. "Whatever you need, Jim. I'll give you whatever time you need." We stood there for a moment, the night stretching on around us, silent and heavy. There was no going back. Our marriage would never be the same. But maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. Not together, not yet, but someday. As we walked to the car, I realized that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. something unknown, something fragile, and whatever came next, I would have to face it one step at a time.